We all know what sustainable design means, right? It's design that considers people and planet. But what happens when the rhetoric bumps up against reality? Is good on paper always good in practice? What does sustainable design look like in the real world? That's what we're here today to discuss in this mixed roundtable with RAK Ceramics. So, sustainability in the real world. Where does good in principle meet great in practice? That's what we're here today to discuss. I want to start by thanking RAK Ceramics for hosting this conversation, of course, to all of you for joining us. Now, before we dive into conversation, let's start with introductions. So if you can each introduce yourself and tell me, do you think that you design sustainably?
Hi, I'm Rachel Basher. I'm the founder and CEO of Basher Franklin Design Studio, Architecture and Interior Design. I think we design at the highest level of sustainability within the parameters that we have today.
Ooh, good answer. To be a politician.
Yeah.
Harrison.
Now I've got to follow that. Yes, hi, I'm Harrison Rivers. I am working for Perkins & Will in a corporate interior studio, and my role is a senior architectural technologist. I feel that we really do put a lot of thought into designing sustainably. It's really at the core of what we do, and I feel, it is the core of what I do. The challenge is getting the clients on board with that sometimes. But I think, we're pushing the agenda.
I'm Samantha Allen. I work with M. Moser Associates as an Associate Director in the Engineering, Technology and Sustainability group. So we sit as the subject matter experts for our design teams to reach out to, and we are increasingly utilised. So I definitely think that we now design sustainably.
Hi, I'm Adam Childs from Gensler. I'm design director there in the interior studio. And yeah, I would like to think that I design sustainably. I think it's something that I feel a responsibility to try and achieve in every one of my projects and to make the best impact that I can with my clients. And yeah.
Hello there, I'm Angela Leouts. I work for Area Design and Build Company. I'm the creative director in our London design studio. And absolutely sustainability is the forefront of what we should be achieving in our work. So I would like to think that it's what we do as default, as Rachel said, within the parameters we have to work with.
Hi, my name is Rodolfo Ferraris. I'm a design consultant for RAK Ceramics. And obviously from the manufacturer side, we try to be as sustainable as possible. It's something that we try to improve constantly, and luckily the whole industry is focusing on that right now. So the answer is yes, we try to be as sustainable as possible.
So it sounds like everyone's trying. We've heard about parameters, perhaps where the boundaries of that effort might hit up against reality. Perhaps, and of course that's what we're here today to talk about. In our first chapter, I want to deal with the ideal versus the real.
So I think one of the biggest contradictions that we see between what we say and what we do in design can come down to the certifications, actually. A lot of them have prescribed metrics and measures and things that you have to meet. And all of that is great for documentation, it looks good on paper, but it doesn't always lead to real outcomes.
So I think the biggest contradiction is where aspiration meets monetary cost for clients, because I feel that we are at a place in the industry where we as designers understand that it's not just a tick box exercise, it really is a responsibility.
I think the contradictions between what we say and what we actually do, unfortunately, always come back to the fact that we're dealing with lead times, product availability, budgets. You can say, you can have grand designs for being the most sustainable product and project out there, but there's always parameters there that you have to factor in when you're developing a design.
The contradiction is within the system, because it's a system that rewards things like fast deliveries or low costs or mass production rather than things like transparency or durability or true circularity.
We maybe don't have sometimes the honest cost discussions at the earlier stages about realistically what the sustainability direction is going to be. Although we are very adept at what this is now because we're continuing to move that forward, but when some things cost much more than what our clients might think sustainably works for their business, that is the biggest push-pull.
Well, I think one of the biggest contradictions is that I think we could potentially fall into the trap of making sustainability an aesthetic choice rather than one that is systemic. And I think that's probably because a lot of the great work that goes on in sustainability doesn't photograph beautifully, right? You know, a reclaimed timber floor or a green wall looks fabulous. A photograph of your carbon calculation, slightly less exciting.
When a client says they want a sustainable project, what do they actually mean?
I think a lot of clients do have an ESG requirement within their reporting, so that might start there. Some of the larger companies will have that, so that will be their objective, which we will align with. But we will naturally come with our own design DNA, and that is very much part of our process. So if they work with us, it's a part of what we do. So we don't tend to drive it home as sustainability. We drive it home as high quality design. So, but the clients will generally, it'll be driven harder by their side if there is a reporting requirement, and also to get us to meet certain accreditations that align with their needs. So that's really where we have been moving the dial quite in a really good way, I think, in terms of reporting for them, for their requirements. So
that's a really good point. Often clients, I think, have the right intentions or have a rubric that they feel they need to meet. But when you actually start talking to them and you start asking them questions about it, you realize that they see sustainability or sustainable design being represented in a different way than perhaps you first came in with, you know, the frameworks that we do have, LEED, WELL, those types of things. And actually what they want is something that might be more circular, and there are increasingly better ways to measure like how circular a space is. There are ways to quantify that better. Or they might want something that is perhaps just really focused on using natural materials or using local materials. Oftentimes people think of sustainability, certainly for materials, as needing to come from the place that you're in, because that's what drives a lot of the carbon or things like that. But actually, usually that level of transport is one of the lowest contributors to a material or a product's carbon lifespan. So when you start to dive into it, you can, I think, tease out a different conversation. What clients often go in with is not what they come out with. And that's not a bad thing.
I think sustainability as a term is quite fluid, and it's a big topic. And I think sometimes clients, maybe there's sort of three groupings of them perhaps. Like there are those that are motivated by the certification, that they want to kind of get a certificate, they want to get something that proves that they have met their obligations. You get those that are really interested in the story, you know, the marketing opportunity that comes from saying, yeah, we've done a sustainable project here. And then you get those that really genuinely want to do something like impressive on that sustainability side. So I think there's almost the human side of it behind, is trying to understand what the motivation is for the client, which one of those is the way that they're really approaching it. And then when you want to push them further, you can sort of speak the language of sustainability that sort of resonates with them.
I expect, Angela, you might come at this from a slightly different angle, because I suppose the expectation of what you're doing is a little bit different, being D&B. So when someone comes to you and says, I want a sustainable project, what do they generally mean by that? How do you actually put something tangible to that request?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, we're still delivering spaces for people to kind of work and socialize in, but when we're doing it usually on a much faster time frame, and we've got maybe bigger cost parameters that, or, you know, restrictions than some of the larger projects, you do have to tackle the time and the money and what clients have got in terms of what we can deliver in that time. I mean, we have a sustainability team within our office, so it still sits at the front of what we do and what we're expected to do, being B Corp certified as well. So we're quite kind of rounded in terms of what the expectation of what we should do as a business.
Well, this chapter is about the ideal versus the real, and I'm wondering if actually in asking for a sustainable project, does it come down to, I want to be able to say it is a sustainable project, more than necessarily dealing with the detail of what that means or could mean?
Well, I do think that a lot of companies are very focused on their people, and that's their biggest impact on their business. So looking after their people and doing a sustainable well project is a huge, genuine driving force. So getting that right does pay big dividends for the companies that you're working for. So that's really positive.
You talked about this idea of materiality, and I'm wondering if designers are perhaps guilty of allowing sustainability to become something that is aesthetic. It's, I don't want to say knitted muffins, but it's the kind of natural materials, the green walls. It's something that, again, is very superficially sustainable, that someone coming into that space might understand as being a shorthand for sustainability, as opposed to being something that really deals with systems. You must deal with that when someone comes in and says, okay, I want a sustainable product. How much does it have to look like a sustainable product?
No, so I think it comes down to, always comes down to look sustainable, but usually the whole process of sustainability is what you don't see. For example, the whole manufacturing process, the works that happen in the factory, how the material is built, the raw materials, but those are not the things that then will sell sustainability, right? So I feel that it's almost like a facade that they have to put on, but that is not really what brings the real solution for sustainability.
Do you think there's a risk that sustainability could be seen as something a little superficial in design? It makes me think of the days when everything was about biophilia, and somehow that became just to mean plants and I've got a green feature wall, when actually there's so much more to that in terms of circadian rhythms and access to daylight and all of those types of things. Is there a risk that sustainability becomes something that is purely aesthetic, or at least interpreted that way, especially by clients perhaps?
I mean, I definitely think there has been a very earthy, natural response to the spaces that people want to be in. So that has been a driving force, but and as well in hospitality, as we sort of crisscross between residential and hospitality, feeling natural and that aligning to people's values has very much been what has been very appealing. Hopefully people can be authentic with that, because you don't feel it necessarily if you've got plastic plants. You know, you need to have the right genuine feeling when you're in the space. So hopefully as people recognize that's a fake sustainable, fake feeling good space, it won't work and endure and be costly in the end.
I think the aesthetic is taking on a different look now, though. I definitely think that the natural sort of aesthetic has been very strong for the last 8-10 years, but recently it is more about reuse and using less. The aesthetic has been a bit more bohemian, perhaps, of like, you know, how has this taken on a second life? What does that look like? Where have these different materials come from and been put together in a new and interesting way? And I think that actually that aesthetic is positive. Not that the natural one isn't. I mean, using woods, for example, or, you know, renewable materials can be very good. Using things like tiles and ceramics is very durable, and usually can be taken back, broken down and made into the same again with almost identical durability and performance. So I don't necessarily think that the aesthetic is a bad thing.
But I'm going to push back on that ever so slightly, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because I'm not going to name the hotel, but I was recently at a recently opened hotel, and in their basement bar they have a fantastic parquet floor, which I thought was original because it looks original, and I commented on the absolutely beautiful wooden floor, and as it turns out, it's brand new, and has been beaten up to create the impression of a floor that was original and has been repurposed for this new hotel. So as much as I get the point that the aesthetic is not necessarily a bad thing, if we do condense sustainability down into an aesthetic, isn't there the potential it gives people something to hide behind that actually isn't really very sustainable at all?
I think that's a really good example of something which is very wrong, because that would have been an amazing opportunity for that client to say, this floor is reused from something which was going to be demolished and thrown away, and we've taken that. And that is part of a story which makes it even more beautiful. Like it's not just about the aesthetic, it's about why have we chosen to do this.
So what do you think are the contradictions then between what we say and what we actually do in practice when it comes to creating truly sustainable spaces?
Well, I think what he just mentioned is a good example, because obviously the right thing to do will have been in this hotel, for example, to do the hard job, to look for the wood, to get to restore it. So, but that will cost money, probably more money than doing what they did, and also time. Exactly, time usually pushes things quite a lot. So, I feel that the whole system is rush and pushes you to make I don't know if it's the wrong decisions, but the easiest ones. And usually those ones are the less sustainable ones.
So, I mean, maybe that is a contradiction in its own right, this idea that actually we say we're designing sustainably, but sometimes we have to make tough or pragmatic decisions that might not be the most sustainable. And that's actually part and parcel maybe of...
Yeah, I mean, if that hotel's not occupied and no one goes there and it's got reused the concrete floor,
Yeah.
it's not a sustainable solution. So such more complex, more holistic approach that you have to make.
And perhaps it would be unfair to judge the full sustainability credentials of that project based on a parquet floor, in which case the question becomes, how do you measure if a project has been successful from a sustainability perspective? Is there a metric in which to do that that can inform the stories we tell?
I think it depends on what the goals are of the project, because if you're wanting to measure carbon footprint, that's something which is very easy to quantify and measure. But if you're looking for something more like social impact, it's harder to measure that, unless you really put time and effort into like social outreach and impact on the local area or for your building's users, and it's about reporting that in a way. And then often you see it gets reported once after the project, but you almost want to see it like year after, 2 years after, like how is this continuing to impact? And that can drive the desire for other clients to do the same kind of thing.
And so in this conversation, in terms of talking about sustainability in the real world, this kind of post-impact research, does that mean that we don't have enough of that? So actually we look at projects and we think, okay, do you know what we did? We did a pretty good job of making it sustainable in creating it, but we rarely get the opportunity to monitor how that space works or how effective it is over time. Is that something that could perhaps be improved?
Well, neighbours is very much a part of that. So, and many buildings are neighbours specified and is requirement. So I think that's fantastic, and we should be improving on the metrics as the life of the project goes on. It's very much more an M&E operational cost metric, but I do think that very much the projects should be more enduring. I think it's terrible how much projects are ripped out and not performing and not being able to be reused and recycled and have that longevity. But if something's badly designed in the first place and it's not optimized and not used well and has a more negative social impact in terms of you've used a lot of materiality that's not been sourced particularly well. That's the crime, and maybe this is where, as we can use data and AI and measurement.
Well, that plays into resource efficiency. I mean, the space in and of itself is a resource. So if it's not used, that's not efficient or effective. So
I think the point that Rachel was sort of making about how the space is designed, are the spaces all being used as they were kind of intended, as they were designed, is a kind of key sort of thing for me. Is it doing the job that it was designed to do? Are people loving it and enjoying it and working in it in the way that you envisioned? And then I think it's sort of looking ahead as well. Have I managed to design something that I think will still be relevant and still work in 10 years' time? You know, have I followed a trend that might fade away, or have I found a signal that's kind of what's coming? And I think it's like, yeah, I think for me, the biggest one is that sort of longevity. Do I think I've designed something that I could be proud to walk back into in 10 years' time and it still looks good? And maybe it was beautiful. People looked after it because it looked nice, because it worked for them, and they didn't have to change it because the process that we went through about understanding them and where they were going had been successful. So I guess maybe, yeah, more than necessarily the certifications, it's that kind of, yeah, longevity that I think.
Well, speaking of things that have changed over 10 years, the whole conversation around sustainability is something that has changed a lot. I remember a time when the big takeaway from these types of discussions was, we want sustainability to become embedded in the design process, not just a nice to have. Maybe we can do a quick show of hands before we move on to our next chapter. Do we think we're there yet? Are we now at the point at which sustainability is just a given and no longer a nice to have? Who thinks yes? Ooh. Peer pressure, Sam, but you're sticking to your guns.
I would love to say that it is, and I think that there are certain elements that do get embedded because, you know, we set certain procurement practices, you know, so sort of our responsible procurement policies, screening out certain vendors, those types of things that whether or not a client is interested will happen. So I do think there is that. But
if your answer is no, how far do we still have to go?
I think we still have a very long way to go. I still think that, you know, our team sometimes gets brought into a project and then, you know, what the recommendations that we make to make a project more sustainable get VE'd out. And it's not necessarily for cheaper swaps or things like that. It's just like, no, that aesthetic isn't right because it, you know, all the chairs don't match because we wanted to use we wanted to use them from different vendors so that we could get them to be all secondhand, something like that. And they're like, no, actually, we want them all uniform. And those are ones that it really frustrates me because I feel like the decision could be easy, but it doesn't get made.
How interesting, because I recently did jury duty. I'm going somewhere with this. And it was the most grim environment in which to sit and spend a week. And one of the kind of quips that I made is that it was basically 20 years of kind of collected chairs. And yet what's interesting is maybe that is actually more sustainable. In a way, what they've done is they've collected all of these kind of chairs over the years. They're using them until, or maybe beyond, until they're kind of in the grave. And yet actually maybe that is a more sustainable approach. It just doesn't really marry with what we generally understand as being good design and perhaps what we traditionally want from a space. Rodolfo, you were another person who didn't put your hand up. So why is sustainability still not embedded and perhaps a nice to have?
I mean, obviously I see more from manufacturer side, and I notice how many things we manage to improve every year. So that shows you that clearly we are not 100% where we could be, because if things, especially lately, can change so much, that means that there is a lot of room still to improve things.
So I think in terms of setting the design agenda, We do see it change project to project, whether that's the client bringing it forward or the design team might be particularly passionate about a certain product, for example, or the client has internal KPIs that they need to meet for the project around sustainability.
We all want to design something which is perfect and shiny and new, but in reality, sometimes less is more. And I think that if we can consider that in our design approach and sell that to clients, then we can really make strides for sustainability in design.
I think it's more about collaboration, where you have the relations setting the floor, so it will be kind of the bare minimum, and then what you achieve probably depends on the ambition that all the other parts together have.
I think the sustainability agenda is being set across the board. It's from designers, it is clients, it's regulations that we need to meet. There's some really interesting things coming through from new designers and students who are graduating at the moment whose focus is on sustainability and using natural resources to create more sustainable and thought-provoking products.
The people that are setting the sustainability agenda now, I think, is in two parts. The designers, it's very much within our system of doing our projects. And also there is very much the drive from the big corporations in terms of their ESG objectives. And so that has been the biggest leap forward, is that the big corporations are being monitored. They are being reporting back in a very high quality way. So those two things coming together is helping us have much better outcomes.
There are leaders, I think, across the industry. So I think you come across fantastic clients that really want to make a difference, that their carbon ambitions arrives in the first line of their brief before they even get into what they need to try and achieve. You know, that's incredible when that happens. I think as designers, you know, there's some fantastic designers doing some great work across the world, across London, you know, and I think we're doing a good job generally. It's a journey, but we're definitely trying. I think, you know, the manufacturers, the contractors, I think across all the different areas there are real standout kind of performers that are leading progress. And then behind that sort of sweeps the regulation that brings the slightly more reluctant along and makes sure that that baseline and that floor keeps rising.
So we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of responsible specification and the blurry lines between innovation, greenwashing, and actual pure pragmatism. So what is the most genuinely sustainable material choice that you've made? And what did it cost you or the project to use it or make it? And I don't necessarily just mean in terms of an invoice. There are sometimes other costs involved, time, effort, having to spend a lot of time convincing a client that something is worth it, to get something like that across the line. So tell me, the most sustainable material choice that you've made.
I was trying to think of a specific material choice, but I think the most specific and the decision that I would comes to mind that I would say is actually tied to reuse, what you were saying, Sam. We are doing a project with a lot of reuse right now, and part of that is actually accepting the imperfections. And it's stuff that we really focus on as designers, that we see and we know. If we've got heights across everywhere with finishes aligning to everything, that's something we're extremely tied to and don't want to let go. But when an opportunity...
So what it cost you is the ability to realize your vision, to the kind of specificity that you wanted.
Yeah, it's accepting that. It's accepting, okay, well, actually, this piece isn't going to align, but we've taken like 50 linear meters of glazing from a job which has just sat there and it's not doing anything, and we're reusing that. And that's a great story, and also that's a great gain from a carbon perspective and a sustainability perspective, just by accepting, actually, okay, we can let this bit slide. So that's what it cost us.
I think we've had more clients, and we've got suppliers that we're using that are giving us the opportunity to maybe reuse something that the client has taken from their old space, turn it into something and make it new, whether you know, ripping up old kind of tickets that belong to shows that they went to or, you know, produced, and turning it into a worktop, and, you know, adding it to product to create product. That's quite fun and quite interesting, where you've got suppliers you can engage with to create something that's purposeful and specific to that client. And there's time and money and effort that goes into creating that, but then it's the piece that comes out at the end. That's not happening on every job for certain, but when you've got clients who are keen to engage in that, that's really fun. It takes more time, yeah, and you have to have the right client and the right project, but definitely it's quite satisfying from a design perspective, where you can take something and turn it into something new and give it a new life.
How do you vet a manufacturer's sustainability claims? How do you prove to yourself that they are walking the walk?
Well, I think that you've got to have a bit of a system to do that, and it's pretty multifaceted. I think we tend to look deep into what the material makeup is, and avoid petrochemical-based products, nothing with VOCs, and really just have that sixth sense at the beginning, at the outset. Does this really feel, touch like it's an authentic material that it is going to be a positive piece of materiality? And then you start to dig deep, and then you might go to the factory, but you have to have multiple sources. There's lots of certification that you can start to bring in, but you also have to interrogate that. And because manufacturers can, do a little bit of tweaking to that and pushing it in a way that it looks good, but there has been a lot of petrochemical materials out there that are on the BREEAM list, and which we just ban. No, we won't use that because we feel that that's not the right material, and it's not pushing it far enough to be, in our mind, a sustainable product.
If you're looking maybe at something just like carbon, so you're maybe just looking at the GWP of a product, plastics often come up much lower than woods or ceramics or other, more sustainable materials. So, but in terms of a broader sense of sustainability. So yeah, for I think that idea of saying no, we are taking a stand on using petrochemical materials is a really, really strong one. And it's something I think that gets overlooked because of maybe the hyper focus that has come onto carbon recently.
How do you gauge if the claims are accurate?
So it used to just be through certifications. I mean, our team was very heavily just focused on LEED, BREEAM, how do we meet what is written down here? How do we, collecting all of the EPDs, VOC certificates, those types of things. But we work with a lot of smaller suppliers, or especially if we're working on a small project where we're getting something that's bespoke, or it's just one, piece in the center of the room. They're not going to have that type of information for just one thing, or if they're a very small manufacturer. So we do ask them and work with them to understand about their manufacturing process, what goes into that, what do they mean when they say that they're sustainable, get them to elaborate, and really sort of understand what goes into the product.
Rodolfo, can I just ask though, what do you mean when you say you're sustainable?
So obviously we are constantly asked for information, and these days I think it's something that happens more and more and more, and it doesn't go just it's not as simple. I feel that we are being asked more specific questions and deeper, and it's right, because the only way to get somewhere is proving it. So we try to be as transparent as we can to get certifications and to put the information out there, so you don't have to also dig into it too much. You can just go to a website and you will find all the certifications.
And I guess there's a positive to that in that it probably pushes you as well. So I think one of the things around sustainability is there often seems to be this attitude that everything needs to be perfect right now. Yeah. And in actual fact, sometimes that process of digging and pushing and saying, well, we need it to be more like this, is actually part of the journey of becoming more and more sustainable over time as well.
But also, to be fair, the fact that we are at a point that if you are not the most sustainable manufacturer, and the other manufacturer has something that is even slightly better in terms of sustainability, your product won't be used and the other product will be chosen. So that also obviously pushes the whole industry to get better and better and better, because otherwise you get nowhere. Exactly. And these days we are seeing huge projects all over the world, especially in the Middle East, and you don't want to lose a project just because you didn't manage to prove something. So that's why we try to be as transparent as possible.
Well, while we're on this topic of materials and specification, I mean, the point you made about plastic is an interesting one. My partner is a chemical engineer. Plastic isn't inherently the worst thing in the world. It's often how we have chosen to use it, to treat it as something disposable. So where does that kind of hierarchy of decision-making come into something like this? So we're talking about how you might be able to go to a brand and kind of poke at their sustainability credentials, but sustainability isn't ever quite so simple. So how do you deal with the kind of that hierarchy of decision-making to prioritize some elements over others and making those choices?
I don't think you ever want to design something which could be considered disposable, but designing for adaptability is quite important. You know, thinking ahead about how this could be reused, if it's by your client or down the road as well, should be a very important part of the decision-making process, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we will be needing to put things back into the circular economy, designing for disassembly. That's why, you know, probably timber is so good. And if we're using mechanical fixings rather than glues, we can start to really be quite authentic in it being a sustainable, recyclable material. But, you know, I would always lean away from toxic materiality. And I always think, if that's going in the ground under your house, do you want that material there? You know, that's just a very logical way to approach sustainability, and that we should be always worried about our waterways and our earth and soil, and how that will impact year on year as a responsible way.
But to put you on the spot, Adam, you mentioned circularity, but is circularity ever really possible in interior design, or is it something that still kind of belongs in the realm of theory or perhaps even marketing spiel?
Well, I think yes, I think is the answer. I think circularity can be possible and should be the thing that we're all working towards. This sort of linear model of you take something, use it and throw it away, like, just can't be our future. So circularity's got to be the thing that we're focused on, but it does have a massive challenge, an infrastructure challenge, time, technology, that the whole industry has to collectively kind of come together. And right now it's quite tough. There are some strands that are working, but I think as designers, it's kind of our responsibility, if we do like to think that our work will still be there in 10 years, and then we have designed it demountably or modularly, that maybe in 10 years time, that infrastructure is there. So when they come to take that down, you know, it's there. So I think it's kind of our responsibility to keep designing with this future in mind.
What are the current barriers? What do you think, Angela? What are the barriers to having that circular design economy now? What do we need to overcome?
I think it's all the people that are involved in that process, kind of knowing what their place is within that process. I mean, something is, as you think about carpet tiles, for example, you'll have manufacturers that are happy to say that we'll take this back at the end of the job and we'll you know, strip it out, take it back to its bare bones, make more carpet out of it, or use it for something else. But the people who are managing that office space need to know that, you know, you can contact them when the carpet needs to be taken up so they can take it back. So it's a knowledge piece.
What do you think, Sam? What are the greatest barriers, perhaps, to having that genuinely circular interior design economy?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit about what you were talking about before, where you work with great suppliers who are able to take back stuff and sort of reimagine it, reconfigure, reupholster, whatever it might be. I think that's kind of one of the biggest missing links in the circle for the circular economy, is how do we get from not quite end of life, but sort of midlife, but end of use for client A, and how do we get it to client B? And oftentimes, you know, when we are on tight design and build schedules, DLAPs happen within a couple days. And so you've got this narrow window of how to rescue all of this stuff in this space and move it to somewhere else. There's not good, there are some companies that are doing storage, but there's issues about re-warrantying certain things as well. So I think that piece of the puzzle is, there's bits and pieces that have been filled in, but it's not a clear link yet.
What might facilitate the kind of change required to overcome that problem? I mean, would it be regulating, mandating that actually you have to take these materials out and do something with them? It's not enough to say, well, we've only got 2 days. It all goes into landfills.
So I think regulation definitely is always a good driver behind those things, because if you have to do something, then you have to do it. So, you know, you haven't got a choice. I think, you know, the BCO's recently introduced sort of more new ideas around, you know, not having to return to Cat A, for example. And I think the return to Cat A is one of the biggest issues still. It wastes so much flooring. I mean, the amount of material waste in order to do that is shocking. So I think the new recommendations to not do that would be good if they're adopted. But again, those are just recommendations. So if it became more forceful.
Well, if regulation was the stick, what might the carrot be?
That is a very good question. I mean, I'm almost tempted to say the carrot should just be that you're doing the right thing. It should just be accepted. It should just be the way things are. I don't think there should be some incentive to do this. It should be, you know, redefining the paradigm to be, this is how we do things.
Do you think, if we're talking about the real world, that it's a noble idea, but do you think doing the right thing is ever going to be a driver in this industry, just in and of itself?
I think there's something where businesses want their workspace to be a reflection of what they believe in and where they're going, and they want their staff to feel connected to that journey and feel proud of their organization. So there's something potentially about building something sustainably, being able to tell your people and show your people that you're serious about that, beyond just what the business does, but also even down to the space, and that person might be more connected and more engaged with that company. Again, quite hard to sort of quantify, but a carrot.
I mean, I think we have a real issue though in our industry where the process that we're under is so challenging, and that the viewpoint of the product and the longevity of the product can be quite a different world. And the return on investment and the feeling good about how wonderful the space is, and we reuse this, and all those little stories, and everyone being excited about that doesn't go on that Excel spreadsheet on the value in it. They, you know, how quickly can we deliver it, and speed to market. These are all the words that we get, you know.
Yeah, even things like talent acquisition and retention, which is a big part of that story. Ultimately, it's like, okay, how do we get the younger people in who do care more about these types of topics? Those don't make it anywhere near.
Well, we're talking to procurement people for the process, and the people who are occupying, and the HR and the marketing people, whoever on the, you know, product side. They're completely different worlds. Those worlds have to be more holistic and aligned to get those benefits, to get the carrot and the stick working.
Well, let's stay with that idea for our third chapter, clients and compromises. So how far can you go before something pushes back? So we're going to explore where good intent collides with budgets, regulations, and client expectations, and how to work creatively within or maybe even against some of those constraints.
I think if we were to have a radically honest conversation within our industry around what sustainability really looks like, it would be quite challenging, because I think ultimately it comes down to using less.
So I think it will be definitely an uncomfortable conversation to start with. And the first thing, in my opinion, will be the fact that we have to admit that is an industry that comes with an impact to the planet. So obviously we can try to improve things to reduce waste, to recycle water, to lower our emissions, but the impact will always be there.
Radically honest conversation is, do we need to be making more product? And that's really difficult because we're all here because we're buying and specifying new things, and we're not quite there yet in terms of recycling and reusing as much as we hope to be. Sustainability has been around for a long time in the industry, and it's very, very slow for us to get there because we know the commercial challenges are really broad and great.
The agenda is being set by designers, but it is fragmented. I think the regulation sets the minimum standard, but we as designers need to be the ones who say it isn't enough to just scrape by with minimum standards. We need to push the agenda. We need to push clients to want more.
I'm not sure we're ready for a completely radically honest sustain question and within the industry, but imagine if it was something that this whole new project needs to be 100% sustainable, 100% recyclable. There's nothing new in this project. What if the whole thing was done with reused products, reused materials? I think that's a big ask, but wouldn't that be cool?
So I think it might sound like an admission that we're in an industry that probably celebrates newness over longevity. And, I think that every time we are presented with an opportunity to push sustainability that we don't take, whether or not it's a material that doesn't seem right, a timeline that doesn't stack up, or even a project that shouldn't be made, and we don't speak up and push the sustainability as much as we can, in some way we are complicit.
We talked about the greatest sustainable choice that you've made. What's the biggest sustainability compromise that you've had to make? And did it feel like failure or just realism?
I think, so one of my biggest sort of bugbears, I guess, is metal suspended ceiling tiles going into Cat A type spaces. And I feel like I'm old enough that I kind of remember when carpet used to be part of that Cat A, and it kind of, you'd fit out, it'd all be done, it'd all be blue, and it would all go straight in the skip as soon as someone took that space. And it feels to me like that white suspended metal ceiling tile lives in that category, which is like quite a big choice that covers a lot of the space that someone's going to take that not everyone wants. So, I have had clients walk in to take space with one of those ceilings and go, I don't want this ceiling, and so you have to think, well, that's what they want to do.
So does that feel like, if it stays, is that a failure where you think, do you know what, I didn't do enough to convince? Or does it feel like realism, where you think, do you know what, at the end of the day, we're here as a studio working on behalf of a client, that's what they want, sometimes you have to compromise?
I think often it is a compromise. So you talk to them about, actually in these areas, the ceiling is going to be really good, it's going to work, it's functional, and maybe in these areas, we'll do the aesthetic changes that you're looking for. And then also trying to find ways where that ceiling tile is taken down carefully, potentially stored. There are schemes where they're doing this, and then trying to find places for them to go so that you can feel okay about the fact that that's come down and it's potentially got a chance to be reused.
Because that does happen. And I'm just wondering, Rachel, do you think that beauty, something looking right, should ever justify an unsustainable choice?
There's always, I think, some things that we think are beautiful and unsustainable are enduring. So that's where we sort of probably go, well, I think we think that that's going to be lasting a long time, and has an inherent beauty that is going to be appreciated, and that has a lot of value. So that definitely comes into the mix. But there is this aesthetic. We wanted to do a fully biodegradable space for a client, a reception space, and it was going to be a great big talking. It had never been done before, and then as we started to bring the materials, it was looking a bit organic and biodegradable nonetheless. So, and they didn't really like how, biodegradable it looked. So, but we thought just like keep going with us. Like we would, I think we would do, it wasn't going to be shiny glass, and it was going to be organic. So, but yeah, we kind of ran around quite quickly on that. But I think there's any clients out there that want to do a biodegradable. We have gone quite far in our research, but and then we could make it happen. But yeah, the aesthetic got pulled.
So how can you convince a client then to perhaps choose the less beautiful option, maybe even the less convenient option, because it is more sustainable? How does that work?
It's all about storytelling, I think. It's like the reason behind why you're doing it. And maybe, understanding your client's very important to that as well, like understanding what's going to resonate with them and work with them and their brand to try and sell that. And it's challenging what we deem as perfection versus, is it perfect and brand new and shiny and all of that? Or, is this taken from somewhere else and there's a story behind that? Is it local to the area? Like, is the client local to the area? Have they stayed there for a long time? Is there something you can resonate with there?
Do you think, Rodolfo, that sustainability should always cost more?
I think it does cost more at the beginning because obviously there is a lot of investment on. It's not as easy as saying we are going to change it. There is a lot of work behind, a lot of investigation, how to change process, how to make things different, and obviously all that costs a lot of money and time. But once that is done, it's great because it's there, and then you can just either keep improving it or move on to something else on how can I improve something else. So yeah, I think it costs money, but yeah, it's a good reason to spend the money.
But is that a difficult conversation to have when you have a client that's looking at a bottom line?
Yeah, it can be, for sure. I mean, even if, you take it down to something as simple as, they might want to reupholster some furniture they've got, but it costs just as much to reupholster as it does to buy something new. And then you've got the time that piece is out of action between one office to the other. Yeah, it's where they're prepared to compromise in terms of the time or the budget.
How do you perhaps navigate some of those trickier conversations to create a justification for making the more sustainable choice, despite it potentially being less convenient and maybe even more expensive?
Again, depends on the client and their angle and where the importance lies for them.
But really what it comes down to, if we're going to be honest, is that if they don't want it.
But you should go for, what's the biggest impact and work backwards from that. And that's where you're not going to win every battle, but you should win the big ones and get them to be aligned and ring fence the most important decisions that are sustainable. And if it's not, reupholstering an existing chair, the carbon, the cost, the delay, that's not going to be a game changer in the way that all the ceilings, the floors, the partitions, that is your big hitter in terms of sustainability.
Well, perhaps in terms of trying to avoid some of those battles to begin with, might be a difficult question, but should design practices sometimes say no to projects that don't align with their sustainability principles? Or is engagement always better than just saying no? Do you think, Sam?
I think engagement is definitely always better. I think you should always try to have that conversation. And ideally, firms are in a good enough position to say no to projects who really go against their values. But that isn't always the case. And at the end of the day, you still, there are decisions that need to be made on a company basis. And you need to take care of the people that work for you, the design teams. There's all these people. Like, if you're not getting the projects that you think you should be, or you're spending a lot of time on a pitch that didn't go well. There's multiple reasons, but I do think engagement's always better though. Always have that conversation, because you might find actually they don't care what the aesthetic is, they just want to save costs. And you're like, okay, or just save time, because usually reupholstering, it might be the same as getting something new, but the lead time might be a lot shorter than getting something that it's 4 weeks instead of 8.
Do you agree with that, Harrison? Do you think it's realistic to say to a practice, just don't work with them?
No, I don't think that's realistic or the right way to go about things. I think it's about challenging where you can and learning from that process. I mean, I'd agree definitely with some of the things you say, Sam. And it's not always time, it's very often also cost. And for example, we had a very similar thing recently where we wanted to reuse door handles for all our doors, because these things are designed to last for a very long time. It's a very safe decision, but half of it gets VE'd because it's actually more expensive to reuse something which already exists and just create something new. And there's also kind of the attitude from clients to then say, well, if I'm going to pay more and get something that's 15 years old, I want something that's brand new. So that's a challenge.
So how do we overcome that? And it can be systemic change, so it might actually be saying, well, we need to make it cheaper, because if we know that people are going to be motivated by cost, well, maybe that's what needs to change. We can't just rely on people doing the right thing.
I think, a lot of it is dependent on how the opportunity can present itself and how we can support that kind of decision. So to go on that same example, there are a lot of ironmongery contractors who are very on that and really into reuse and really trying to push that. And that is great to see, because that's the kind of support that we need to engage with that. And I think reuse is really the way to have the most impact, like you said, Rachel. So I think that kind of support is great. Also leaning on contractors as well. I don't feel like that's been touched on very much. I think, sometimes contractors, they're concerned with their bottom line. And if they really buy into the process as well and challenge and think about it, the more people you've got thinking about how to make this work, the more likely you are to achieve.
Yeah, I'm not going to go down the AHO route though. I think just looking to the future, I had the opportunity of going to Dutch Design Week last week in Eindhoven, and it was spread across the city. It's huge. It's like Clerkenwell Design Week on steroids. It's enormous. And what was quite interesting, it wasn't lots of showrooms with kind of furniture products and things. It was pop-ups with student work and new designers coming to and producing pieces from reuse products, and it was really quite interesting just kind of seeing how that kind of new wave of designers and industries coming forward and looking at reuse products and using things in a different way. Really cool chairs made out of reused lino and kind of really kind of
on that point though, so I was in Copenhagen not long ago, and I went to the design museum and they had an exhibition on, and it was about fungus and mycelium, and it was very interesting. It was a fantastic exhibition, felt very radical, but the question becomes, is this ever going to be something that becomes mainstream? Is it ever going to be something that's really adopted into the general design landscape? I'm not sure about that as much as we talk about.
I don't think it's going to be industrial scale. I mean, we've used mycelium on light fittings and on acoustic panels, and it looks and feels beautiful. And obviously it's got no VOCs, it's wonderful. But I think if we're going to really move the dial, it is in the being able to reuse materials in an efficient way, and this whole using of technology to do the logistics and knowing where to buy. And I know the furniture industry is moving massively into reuse, and it's been driven by net zero from the clients, and so that's a massive, but they're getting mobilized. But we should also have tax incentives and logical things that will really get the investment. And this is where we're using very niche companies that make mycelium.
But I want to go back to the point you say, because I think the point, whenever I say I don't see it taking off, I think it's because I am thinking on an industrial scale, because the argument would be that for something to affect genuine, meaningful change in this industry of the scale that it is, doesn't it need to be industrial? I mean, isn't that the only thing that's ever really going to move the needle?
If we think about ceilings and partitions and floorings, it all needs to be demountable and enduring and being able to be either easily refurbished or not needing to be refurbished. And your demountable partitions, it's not beyond us to get some partitions that should be able to be reused and in a module or in a, that's aesthetic. Everything should be beautiful. It shouldn't be ugly, and they should be arranged, but I think, we're a lot of smart people making a lot of smart products, and I know the universities are making, coming up with really great, interesting materials, and I see that as the future. But it's getting the money behind it,
Yeah, the thing is that it takes a lot of research to manage to do something, as Rachel said, beautiful. For example, we have this new range that is called Reuse, that is made 100% from pre-consumer material, but it didn't happen from one day to the other one.
I thought you were going to say, but it isn't beautiful.
Yeah, but yeah, obviously it takes time to get something looking as good as the other ties, because obviously we have other ties, so you will be like, you put them next to each other and you will be like, this one doesn't quite look like the other one. But yeah, after investing some time, effort, and obviously money as well, you end up having a product that looks exactly like the other type, but is way more sustainable. And at the end of the day, you feel proud as well that you managed to achieve this. So it's exciting, the fact that you think, okay, we are happy with this now, so we probably will continue doing the same thing with the rest of the products.
Well, that feels like a kind of honest conversation to say, look, we can produce more sustainable collections, but actually we have to work a lot harder and we have to spend a lot more money to make them look as beautiful as people might want them to be. So last question to wrap up, and we're going to go back around the table. And that question is, what would a radically honest sustainability conversation in our industry sound like? And are we ready for it?
Oh man. So it comes to the money. It all just comes back to money and having growth in economies. And I don't think that we should be aiming for growth. I think we should be aiming for much more sustainable existing, rather than this constant need for growing economies. And I think that is a really negative impact.
I would 100% agree with what was just said, and I think that money is a huge thing to clients, and like everyone wants to be able to do what they want to do for as cheap as possible, essentially. So it is challenging that. I mean, another point I would raise for us as designers is what I was touching on before, the perfection versus imperfection piece. I think, that is something that we can consider within our own process and think, okay, like I'm going to release control a little bit of this and accept that actually this is good in another way that maybe I'm not used to. And it's playing that back to the client and selling that as part of the design intent. So
and to the people ultimately using the space, do you think we're ready for that conversation?
Yeah, because there's an expectation that, oh, I'm moving to a new office and my company is spending lots of money on this and I'm expecting this to be brand new and sparkly and all of that kind of stuff. But again, I think that's where if you create the right type of intent and story around it, that's something that definitely a client can use, not just for their own brand, like everywhere, but also internally for the people who are coming into that space as well, and saying, this is a brilliant thing that we're doing here.
I think for me, we need to think about how to pivot away from having more. We need to think about, how do we do more with less? How do we keep the things we've got, or use less? And unfortunately, that delivers a very awkward conversation about economics, because you do need, we're all in the industry to produce things. So what is it that our value then becomes? Like, how do we shift? How do we pivot to produce value without necessarily producing stuff?
An industry that kind of maybe values newness over longevity, and I think we need to try and find a way to celebrate the boring stuff that does move the dial. And it's you know, the surface stuff is easy to photograph, and it's easy to understand, and the stories are easy to comprehend. But the stuff that's really making a difference, a lot of it's invisible.
Are we ready for boring conversations?
Never. I think we do need to be. I think we need to find a way to make the boring exciting. I think that's going to be the key. The stuff that really matters. How do we put that before the photograph and the surface?
I don't know if we're ready. I mean, sure about the boring stuff. I mean, the stuff that does make big impact is like the mechanical systems, how the building actually runs and how it works. You know, that's all the stuff that happens up behind those, you know, ugly white suspended ceiling tiles. It's a tricky one. I think everyone needs to be on board, and everyone has a different agenda. So I think we're probably not there yet.
I think part of the conversation will be also to accept that it's an industry that comes with an impact, whether you like it or not, and whether you manage to reduce it, because you can produce less carbon emissions, you can recycle your water, but at the end of the day, the impact is still there. So I think the most honest thing to do is to be transparent about it. And once that you're transparent about it, you can improve it as much as you can.
Through conversation and chat. So that's the great thing about talking, is hopefully it will lead to action. And I think with people like you at the helm, I'm sure we have a more sustainable future.